I'm Tony Guida. This is My New York, and happy to have you back for part two of my conversation with Barry Weissler, the producer with his wife Fran of Chicago, which, in case you haven't heard, is now the longest running American musical in Broadway history at 25 years and showing no signs of quitting, which is great. But to get from that moment in 1996 to where we are now, this man you're looking at and his wife had to pull rabbits out of hats and all sorts of other things. So you left us, Barry, talking about you want to put this thing together. You put together a modest budget. Michael Riedel in his book says it was $2.5 million, which is pretty modest for Broadway. And you left us with the word that Rocco Landesman, Jujamcyn, decided to go into business with you. Gives you a theater and says, "I'll come up with half the money." And you're on your.
And the theater was the most important thing because Sam Cohen, the agent for Fred and John, wouldn't finalize our agreement unless I could show him a theater that was available in the 96 year. Because of course we were heading towards 97 and he gave us a mission to have a theater in 96.
So just so I understand, the agent wants you to, is demanding that you open this show before the end of the year, 96. And what month is this that you're trying to begin this?
Well, we're trying to begin in November of 96. And we have a theater now with Rocco. We have his theater. We bring it to Sam Cohen. Everything is fine, except right after we wrapped everything up and we're going forward, Rocco gets a call from Andrew Lloyd Webber, and he would like that theater for his new production of Whistle Down the Wind. Do you recall that?
Sure. No, I don't, because it
never
bombed.
came in.
Yeah, it bombed. Or no, actually, it never came in. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and the point about that, Barry, it's an interesting point. The Jujamcyn people had turned down Andrew Lloyd Webber in a recent, in his earlier attempt to book a show with them. And I think they felt under pressure, if I understand this right, why we can't do this again. We've got to do this with Andrew Lloyd Webber. So I got to call my friend Barry and say, hey, I made a deal, but I'm sorry, I need to back out.
Exactly. And I guess I was so sure of myself about this production. And I said, sure, no rancor, no argument. We tore up our agreement to be partners, which he never got over later on.
Of course.
And of course, the theater went to Andrew, who did not bring the show in. But we had to scurry, and the best we could do was get the Richard Rodgers for, I think, 2 to 3 months, and then move to the Shubert, who still weren't sure about allowing us that theater. They were looking for something that they were planning on, which I really can't remember at this point.
I think it was Big. I think it was the musical Big, and they felt, it was going to be booked in their theater and it was going to be huge. And yeah, you'll have to
stand in line.
Yeah, you'll have to stand in line.
If it doesn't work, which we know it will, your little revival, which won't last a year, can come in, but it's happenstance. We had no choice. I had no theater to move to. The Richard Rodgers for 9 or 12 weeks, and we opened. We got the money together and put it into the show. Most of it was ours.
Let me just kind of draw that out a little bit. You had a $2.5 million budget.
Right.
Landesman chipped in half of it, but then you guys canceled the deal. So all of a sudden, you and Fran had raised your $1.25 million.
Right.
But now you don't have the other $1.25 million, and you go to your investors And all of a sudden, or maybe surprisingly, maybe not, they're not terribly interested.
Nope, absolutely true. And most of the money was borrowed by Fran and myself from family, from friends, cashed in whatever bonds we had, borrowed against the house we had in New Jersey at the time. And here we were with a $2.5 million budget, with no one believing in the show, with no landlord willing to take a chance on us, except for an interim booking, while Steel Pier was getting ready to come in. And of course, we were the overnight sensation.
Well, I should tell the audience, in case they don't know, that Broadway producers, you and Fran were not the typical Broadway producers. Broadway producers, by and large, are rich people. They've made money in other businesses of their life, and they've decided to invest in Broadway. And if they lose $1 million here, $1 million there, it's not the worst thing that ever happened to them. But you two weren't that kind of couple. I mean, this was, as I understand it, you put your own money in this, which was kind of a violation of the cardinal rule of showbiz. Don't put your own money up.
Never put money in show business. Sitting Bull says that in Annie Get Your Gun.
Yeah.
Wear galoshes, don't eat meat, and never put money into show business. But we did. And the rest is history. We spent $2.5 million here on Broadway, and then we invested as we went along for each road company, for the UK and what have you. But the show's done, it's not a secret, I don't mind telling you, $1.2 billion worldwide on an investment of $2.5 million.
Let's say that again, Barry.
Yeah, $1.2 billion on an investment of $2.5 million. That's quite a return.
And all of that is stuffed into the pockets of that suit jacket.
No, I'm afraid not. A lot of expenses are paid out of that. That's the gross. There are people to pay. There are theaters to pay rent to. There's advertising to do. But we're not complaining on the drift down to the bottom line. It was fine.
Let's go. You've taken us to the nut graph, as they say in news. But let's go to that night that the show opens. Your show opens. I think it was the fall of '96 at the Richard Rodgers, and
Tony, it didn't. It didn't.
It didn't.
Because for the very first performance, you're talking about the press opening, I assume. I'm talking about the first performance on Broadway. Yeah. We got there, everyone was very excited. We had a full house. When the police arrived, about 30 minutes before curtain, and well, it had to be even later than that because all my people were in makeup and costume. So I had to be closer to the 8 o'clock time. And they said, we've just gotten a call and there's a bomb scare. And it's up to you. We can't tell you if there's a real bomb here or not unless we go through the theater. So you can take a chance and open, or you can let us investigate. So here's our very first performance. First, the poor guy has a heart attack down at Encores. Now we've got a bomb threat for our first performance and a theater for 12 weeks and nothing after that. Well, I decided to get the audience out. It was warm. It was not a cold night at all. We got out onto the street. My company went down the street. I think Les Mis was playing, or Phantom, and they housed them there while the audience was out on the street. And about an hour later, we returned. Everything was fine. And then we went up. And that was the first night.
Wow. And obviously, you could see the reaction of the audience, but I imagine that every producer with a new baby on Broadway waits, or at least in those days did, for the New York Times review. And is it like they do in the movies? Did somebody go go buy the paper and pick it up at 43rd Street and bring it to you guys?
No, in those days, there was a machine downstairs where they put the first edition. I can't remember the time, but must have been 11-ish. And we went in, we grabbed the first few copies, and there was the front page. And on the front page, which I'm looking at on a wall over here in my office, on the front page was Chicago with a brilliant, marketable review. And that was the beginning.
And at that point, Nederlander says, "Hey, Barry, you don't have to move the show. You can stay with us." And Steel Pier, the helmet.
We'll give the Schubert Steel Pier. And meanwhile, Big is having trouble at the Schubert. Now I call Jerry Schoenfeld and say, Jimmy would like to keep us, and we're here already, and it's a great theater, so you keep Big. No, we won't pest you anymore, and we'll stay here. I don't know what he was going to do with Steel Pier, but of course now Jerry and Jimmy are butting heads over this production.
Right.
Well, Rocco is calling me and saying, "I guess you think I'm the biggest idiot in the world." He used a different term, but we'll keep it.
I think he used the term schmuck. We can use that.
Yes.
Yeah, we can use that. We understand that.
And now, it's 25 years later. Big failed, Steel Pier failed, unfortunately. I hate any kind of theater to fail, but those two failed, and Rocco's Andrew Lloyd Webber didn't come in, and we're the smartest guys in the world. What can I tell you?
And the footnote, well, it's not really a footnote, but the final detail is you don't have to move. Everything's fine, except the Schuberts say, "Barry, we have a deal. You got to move the show at your own expense. We have a deal. You got to move the show. Bring it to us."
That is true. And we did.
$500,000 to move the show.
Yep, we had to build an elevator to bring our ladies up. It was a big job, but that was many, many years ago.
So you talked about Broadway, and we know 25 years, and you gave us the numbers, the astounding numbers. But how many, tell me more about the worldwide reach of this show.
Well, that's the amazing part. It plays in every language, in every country of the world. Now, we've been to every continent. We have been to every major city and secondary city in all of Europe, South America, Africa. It's never ending, and we're still out there playing. We had a production in Russia a couple of years ago. We had to close in Paris due to the COVID infections. Things closed down. Otherwise, we'd still be playing in Paris, Stockholm, Madrid. The UK is still going strong. We haven't stopped there. They were 1 year behind New York. So 24 years going strong.
Yeah. Where is it playing now in the United States?
We are on tour, and I'm embarrassed to tell you, I don't know what city we're in right now. I'd have to literally look. And here we are on Broadway also.
I don't want you to put you in the role of being a prophet, but last week I quoted John Kander is when he saw the revival, the concert, the Encores production, saying, "Why can't this run forever?" You're the boss. You and Fran. Is this, if you have anything to do with it, going to run forever?
I think so, Tony. Just like this interview is going on forever.
You can help me fill out the rest of the time here and bring out old stories and relationships.
Tony, when you see a production like this in Chinese and in Japanese and in Spanish and in French and German, they all work. They all work. And because I'm so used to the lines, I don't need a translator because I know what they're saying. I may lose, some touches here or there, but basically, you hear your show in all of these languages around the world, and the audiences react the same. This is a universal piece of literature. And that's quite amazing. That doesn't happen too often.
And I go back to my first question, I guess, in another form. After all these years, do you sometimes still wonder how the so-called pros, which you guys weren't, you and Fran, but the big guys, the Schuberts, the Nederlanders, your Jamson people, how they just passed on this and said, no, this isn't going to work on Broadway?
They earmark things from their experience, and in their experience, revivals last a year, and if it's really good, 2 years. So in their minds, that's the library shelf for this kind of material. It's a revival. It will last a year or two. They didn't understand that some things surpass what people believe it should be. And that's what's happened in this particular instance.
All right, we've come to that point in this extended interview where I rely on your good graces and your fabulous memory to tell me some anecdotes about your life in the theater, you and Fran.
Oh, that's a tough one, Tony. I'm not prepared for that. Well, you're asking me to dig, and you'll have to get me back on your program, and I'll prepare.
Okay, if you'll promise to do that.
I will, absolutely.
I'm still thinking about what you said earlier last week in terms of, first studying with Stella Adler and some of those people that were in those classes with you. What kind of relationships, if any, did you form with those folks?
Well, Alvin Ailey was a very, very special man. Here he is, a dance man who wanted to understand theater and wanted to know what it was for a dancer to create character, which only speaks to the wonderful work he did with the Alvin Ailey Company. And Lee Grant, another hardworking actress. These were all people that were dedicated to doing something great in this industry, entertainment, stage work, be it dance or song or theater. Those were the kind of people that studied with Stella.
You told how we talked about how your first Broadway production was Othello because you had, or at least you claimed at the moment, to have James Earl Jones, and you were going after Christopher Plummer. There's a wonderful scene, a couple of scenes in, again, Michael's book of Fran trying to recruit Plummer and how that went down. Tell us about that.
Well, we had to make sure he would tie in with us for the future of the production. After all, we delivered James, but they had the show, they had the play, and we had to transfer it into our hands. And what would be the use of that if Chris didn't go along with Jimmy and agree to tour? We weren't thinking of Broadway in those days. All we thought about was touring. And bless him, he signed on. We did tremendous grosses. In those days, to do $1 million a week on Shakespeare was unheard of. And every city we went to, it was the same. Miami, Toronto, Chicago, LA. These grosses were enormous for Shakespeare, which of course led us to Broadway.
Right. I'm fixated, as I think I indicated, on anecdotes, and there's this wonderful one in that show. In rehearsal, there were some problems with the director.
Yeah.
And Fran, well, tell us what those problems were and how Fran, first-time producer, handles it.
Well, You have to understand that our allegiance was to James. James made all of this possible. God bless Chris, he became a dear, dear friend, but we didn't know him at the time. This was a new relationship to us. Jimmy was our friend and our man. Now, when Peter Coe didn't feel that James could deliver the role, he was quite how can I say this correctly, Tony? He was rough on Jimmy, and it
Let me just stop, let me just stop you there. James Earl Jones
Mm,
is, in the eyes of this director, Peter Coe,
mhm.
the James Earl Jones that we know.
Yeah.
For somehow he's not registering, his delivery or his presentation is not registering with Peter Coe. And as you say, which I find hard to believe, but anyway, Coe is rough on him.
Yes, very. Until Jimmy feels it, and I want to be careful about this, but is this really important to you, Tony?
No, I like the
Talking about
story.
personalities, you're talking about firing people, you're talking about disrespect. I don't know if I want to get into all this.
But I did want to get into it, Barry, only because of Fran's backbone, standing up.
She's the best. She was wonderful at this, but it was both of us. I like that she takes credit for it. That's fine.
Okay.
No, it was both of us dealing with this problem that Peter Coe was not the best director for Jimmy. The relationship wasn't there, and Peter didn't acknowledge Jimmy's qualities. So we made a change. It was a very, very difficult moment. Here we are at Stratford, getting ready to take the show on the road. Jimmy never would have gone if Peter continued as director. At that point, we let Peter go. And now Fran did a magical turn by meeting Zoe Caldwell, who was a very, very new relation in our lives, and convincing her to take over the direction.
Yeah, yeah.
That truly saved us. So Fran did one marvelous thing. It was getting Zoe Caldwell to agree to become the director. And that gave a comfort level to everyone.
What are you guys doing today besides enjoying the September of your years? What shows you working on, if any?
I just had one of my favorite directors leave here, John Doyle. We're doing a revival of Carnival, but in a way that's never been seen before. Much more French, Italian style Carnival, the Lestradas, the Fellini approach to a traveling carnival. You remember Lestrada?
Yeah, sure.
We just had a wonderful meeting. That's going to be one thing. I'm working on a show that's opening at the Atlantic in April. That's called Bedwetter. And that's based on Sarah Silverman's autobiography. And it is hilarious, entertaining, and very, very touching. Very, very good piece of theater. That's called Bedwetter. And we have another piece. We optioned a book called The Splendid and the Vile. Have you had a chance to read that, Eric?
No, I haven't. I was just wondering though, am I thinking of the same person, John Doyle? Is he the director who is now staging the revival of Assassins?
Yes, yes. He did Color Purple on Broadway.
Yeah.
Which won a Tony. And John is a marvelous director.
As I mentioned, Assassins, I'm thinking that American musical theater lost a titan recently with the death of Stephen Sondheim. And I wonder if you've seen, have you seen the Assassins production?
No, and I am going to go down there this week. Have you seen it?
Yes, I have. I enjoyed it a great deal, but the geometry of that theater caused me a little trouble in terms of hearing when the actors were singing to, let's say, one side of the room and not to the other. I was having trouble missing some of the some of the lyrics and dialogue, but a powerful performance. And of course, there's company just getting started again. The gender revised company. Did you ever have any working with Sondheim?
I certainly did. You might recall that Fran and I did the revival of Gypsy with
Oh, of course, yes.
Tyne Daly, and Arthur Lawrence was our director, and Stephen was Stephen.
Well, tell us, some final thoughts. Tell us a little bit about Stephen. And
he's a genius. He's the real McCoy. He belongs to theater and music, and we belong to him. There's nothing more to say.
Well, please do, if I can put in a request, please do another revival of Cabaret. I know you've done that before, but I'd love to see that again. And another Kander and Ebb thing. And of course, Gypsy being a Sondheim thing. Barry, it's been a delight to talk with you, to hear all these stories, and my best to Fran.
And the same to you, Tony. A pleasure.
Thank you so much. And thank you, folks, for watching.